Hello, welcome to CrossCurrents, produced by the City of Fort Collins in cooperation with the Larimer County League of Women Voters. I'm Barbara Rutstein, the moderator of today's program. Our topic is End-of-Life Decisions, Who Should Make Them? In 1991, a legislator in Oregon introduced a Death with Dignity bill. It was one of the first such bills introduced in a state legislature, and it did not pass. However, many in the healthcare establishment supported advanced directives, and over time they came to support living wills and healthcare proxies. In 1994, Oregon voters approved a Death with Dignity Act that was implemented in 1997. Now, 4 other states allow medically assisted death, and as of this spring, at least 25 states have considered death with dignity bills. In Montana and Canada, the courts have struck down laws barring medical aid in dying. Here in Colorado, Joann Ginal, a state representative from Fort Collins, and Lois Court, a representative from Denver, introduced House Bill 151135 in the recently ended legislative session. The bill's title is Concerning a Terminally Ill Individual's Freedom to Make End-of-Life Decisions. The bill received 11 hours of testimony, but was rejected by the Public Healthcare and Human Services Committee. Representative Ginal expects to reintroduce the bill with possible modifications in the 2016 legislative session. For this reason, the CrossCurrents team decided to discuss this issue with Representative Ginal and some interested community members. They are, on my right, Evan Hyatt, board member, Hospice and Palliative Care Association of the Rockies. On his right is Representative Joann Ginal. On her right is Lizabeth Paradise, a nurse practitioner at UC Health. On her right is Dr. David Benson, retired school administrator and educational consultant. And on his right is Alan Rastrelli, a medical doctor and medical director of Divine Mercy Supportive Care. Welcome to you and to our studio and viewing audiences. To start, let's have Joann describe the most important aspects of the bill.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to discuss this important bill this evening. I am State Representative Joann Ginal, and I did introduce this bill in February of this past year, as you had mentioned. And I just want to start out by saying that physicians give patients the very best possible care, but there comes a time when a physician can no longer heal, and whether it's seeking the excellent care that hospice and palliative care can provide or being able to obtain a life-ending medication, it should be the individual's choice. And this is one of the main reasons why I introduced this legislation, House Bill 151135, along with my co-sponsor, Representative Lois Court. Again, it is entitled Terminally Ill Individuals' Freedom to Make End-of-Life Decisions. It would affirm the right of a qualified, terminally ill adult to obtain a prescription from their physician for medication that they may choose to self-administer for a humane and dignified death at a time, at a place, usually at home, and with whom they choose to have around them, family, friends, beloved pets, whatever their wishes. Stringent protections were in this bill. A life expectancy of less than 6 months had to be defined and made clear by 2 physicians. A finding of mental capability concerning a concurring option from a second doctor, so you had to have a second opinion. Mandatory discussion of hospice and other options and waiting periods and more. There are quite a number of other things, but these are some of the stringent protections for the patient. As there were these stringent procedures for the requesting individual, there are also protections for other entities, the doctors, the pharmacists, the hospice, the health care facility, the hospital. All are immune from civil or criminal liability. Insurance companies cannot deny payment of a life insurance policy. The way the bill was written, the death certificate will list the underlying illness as the cause of death, not suicide. Competent people of sound mind should have the right to choose the timing and the place and the manner of their death. Anyone can opt out at any time for whatever reason, whether it be personal or religious reasons or anything else. But this bill is a bill of choice, and I think it just gives someone another option when they don't want family, friends to see them suffer, and they know they're at their end days, and they too don't want to go through that as well.
Would anyone else like to add anything else about the bill that you either think is important that that hasn't been mentioned? Alan?
I think there is a requirement that 2 oral statements are made separated from each other to the doctor stating that they wish to receive the medications for assisted suicide. And then a written statement, I think, that has to be witnessed by 2 people. And one of those 2 people can be a family member or anyone who is eligible for inheritance and things like that. And the other one is a neutral party from the sense of not being associated with the medical profession or other interests in it.
That's correct. Doctor, they cannot be related by blood or by marriage or have any kind of financial, involvement with that person.
But one can, correct? One of the 2.
One, yes.
Okay, anybody have any other comments about aspects of the bill that you think are good or bad, or things you think ought to be changed? No? David?
I'll just be brief. I certainly stand in support of it, and that's notwithstanding the marvelous palliative care and other options available. And but having had firsthand and close to secondhand experiences in a handful of deaths where people wish they could have chosen or chose to but couldn't discuss it with anybody else. And actually having read a well-rendered story recently of a relatively young Alzheimer's patient who decided to take her own life, and she took it right at the cusp when she wouldn't have been competent enough to do it. And those stories are very important for people to experience as much as you can about the realities that the individual who wants to make a choice can go through. And so I would not choose suicide for people. I would choose their opportunity to have choice in how they die.
Okay. How does this bill differ from an advance directive? What is an advance directive? Who can talk about that? Lizabeth, go ahead.
And I need to say that the views that I express are based on my 20 years of experience and are not necessarily those of my employer. But an advance directive is actually a guide that is completed to help patients navigate end-of-life choices. So it lists preferences for things that might come down the road as you become ill or debilitated. Advance directives are a guide for medical personnel, which are sometimes hard to navigate. And the biggest challenge that I see with advance directives is, number one, people don't do them, or they do them and don't discuss them with those people that inevitably end up being in a position to have to elicit the information for the medical community. When you do an advance directive, it can be very helpful, but it certainly doesn't name every situation that people, when they are chronically ill, may encounter.
Is it on file somewhere?
It is supposed to be on file somewhere where it is easily accessible to the point person that you have designated to be able to speak on your behalf. And a challenge really is getting people to understand that we have to have a dialogue about the fact that as human beings, we will age and we will eventually die. And therein lies a great problem with our society. So starting the conversation and sharing the conversation with those that you love about the inevitability of death is of utmost importance, and we don't do it often enough.
Okay, I think I read about, was it the state of Michigan or Minnesota that had a long program? It's been going on for a number of years where people were in a particular town, I think, had, I don't know, 90% of the population. Do you know about that?
La Crosse, Wisconsin.
That's
It's an
it.
amazing story, actually, that yes, 95% of the community. We actually have some grassroots efforts here in our community that have started that are multidisciplinary home health care agencies, skilled nursing facilities, hospital groups that are together having these conversations to help spur people into action to be able to speak to their loved ones and complete their advance directives and talk about if this, I would absolutely endorse these measures, or if this, I would absolutely not endorse these measures. But until we as a society recognize that that we are going to inevitably get to that point and actually talk about it, we're in a bit of a quagmire about it.
And so are there papers that direct you through this process?
The Aspen Club here in town has free services to help with advance directives at any time. There's another form that we use quite a bit here in the state of Colorado called the MOST form. Those are actually medical orders, which are very different than advance directives. Again, advance directives, we have to sort of elicit patients' preferences. They're written very broadly a lot of times, whereas a MOST form are for those chronically ill patients that are in and out of the hospital setting and are much more directive and are held up by state statute, actually.
Okay, Evan?
Another good document that we oftentimes use in hospice is called 5 Wishes, and those are available, well, from hospice providers primarily, or from others. Probably your primary physician can provide them. And I think to echo what Lizabeth is saying, and maybe add one thing, is that those advance directives are meant to speak for you when you cannot speak, and so that's why they're so very important. In hospice, we see only about 25% of the people we serve, unfortunately, that have completed an advance directive, and many times it's trying to be completed at a time, of crisis and at end of life, and that's really not the time to go through it. So the earlier, the better, and of course, as Lizabeth is saying, discuss it with your loved ones who will be there alongside you as you're going through that.
Okay. Yes, David?
I really just have a clarifying question, that advance directives do have limitations, and that the limitation is addressed by Joann's bill. And because I support that too. We have those, and we have understandings, et cetera. But an advance directive can't say that I would direct my physician to give me a lethal dosage of this or that.
But
So
it
that I
can
could
say,
have-
don't give me something that might keep me going.
You can, right, yeah.
Okay.
I have an example of a woman who chose to not eat and drink, and it took a painful month of starving to death, along with the cancer. And she had wished and asked for, can I speed this up, can I speed this up? And she couldn't.
Yes. Joann?
Well, there are several things in regard to this. There's having the conversation, I believe, is something that is happening in Fort Collins. I don't know if it's statewide. Dr. Janet Seeley is spearheading this and trying to get people to talk about death and dying. Also, one thing I learned in the last few months after this bill didn't make it through committee is that physicians can't bill to have a conversation, a very important conversation about end-of-life decisions. And I think that's one thing that, we may want to look at a little bit closer. They only have so many minutes with a patient, But this may need a lot more time to sit down and talk with somebody about how do you want to end your life. This isn't an easy conversation for most patients to have, and let alone to be able to share it along with your family or whoever you wish to share that with. The other issue I want to bring up is that we did model this after the Oregon bill, and surprisingly, a very small number of folks have utilized this, but that option was there for them. That was kind of their insurance policy, that if all else failed, and they had this. And half of those people who fill the prescription, I have 2013 data from Oregon and Washington, where the number of prescriptions written in Oregon was 121, the number that were filled and used were 71. So not many people actually go through with the total process. They may get the medication, but they may never use it. They just have it just in case. I think what brought this to the forefront in recent times, along with some of the patients that were mentioned here, is the Brittany Menard case, which I think showed that this isn't just a situation that involves people over the age of 70, because the average age from the Oregon data that we have is 76. That's the average age of a person who would take this medication. But Brittany Menard knew she had a terminal brain injury. She was 29 years old, just got married, had her whole life ahead of her. And she realized that her seizures were going to get worse and worse. She didn't want her husband or her family to see her in that condition. And when things started to get really bad, she decided to take her life that way because she had to move from California to Oregon in order to do that. But that was the way she wanted people to remember her, the young person and vibrant person she was, not the ill person having seizures and all of the other things that were happening to her body as this disease took its toll on her.
Okay, Alan, did you have a comment before?
Well, if you want to bounce back to the advanced directives.
Sure,
and that
that's
type of
fine.
thing, it is a very important conversation. When I hold a palliative care consult, we have a doctor, a nurse, social worker, chaplain involved. It can take an hour, hour and a half. But that's where you really get into a person and their family and what their philosophy is and what their wishes are. Mm-hmm. And you can designate in an advanced directive certain things that you want and don't want, and so you can choose not to ever be on a ventilator, to not receive chemotherapy, to not have surgery, to not have nutrition and hydration through an artificial feeding tube, to not have attempts at resuscitation. So those are all options that you can put into your advanced directives. But obviously they become deficient when you cannot predict the exact scenario that you're going to be in. So in Colorado, it's very important. The most important part of the advanced directive is your medical durable power of attorney that Evan was kind of referring to. And so that decision maker, when you are not conscious anymore, can't communicate your wishes, can make decisions for you, and it's very important for them to let you know as a decision maker what they want and don't want. Mm-hmm. And it can be, allow me to pass away peacefully, or allow me to receive comfort care, that type of thing. So we do have those options available to us that you don't have to undergo. Like Brittany Maynard, she had her surgery and she was on medication but declined to have the chemotherapy and everything, and when it was coming back, that's when she decided she wanted to participate in the assisted suicide law in Oregon. But if you look, I've got pictures on my slides of Brittany. Just in October, she took the lethal dose on November 1st, right after her husband's birthday. And there's a picture of her and her mom in front of a helicopter at the Grand Canyon. So she was actually taking a lot of trips and everything else. And she wasn't having seizures that were disabling or anything like that. And the seizures are very treatable. And I've had many patients with glioblastoma that have lived much longer than the 6 months and a very good quality of life. So I feel there was a lot of pressure on her to commit to the date that she had set originally when she said, I'm going to take my dose. And on People magazine, she had her picture in front of the bed, music planned, and who was going to be there for her and with her so that she could have this designed death. And when November 1st was coming up, there was reports that she was maybe thinking of delaying that for a while because she was doing pretty well. And sometimes people can do well for months and months and months and continue to do the traveling and do the bucket list if you want. And that's where she lost, I think, that encouragement to go ahead and live life to the fullest while you're still enjoying life. She was enjoying it.
So do you think the publicity is what caused her to stick with her plan rather than going?
She was strongly promoted by Compassion and Choices. They made multiple videos and in People magazine and things like that. They were very influential. In fact, they started their own, under Compassion and Choices, the Brittany Maynard Fund, so that you could contribute to that in the name of Brittany Maynard. So they were very, very strongly involved with her situation of encouraging her to move to Oregon so that she could qualify for residency and things like that.
Okay, Joann doesn't like that.
Well, I don't think you can make these assumptions because I think that she could have opted out at any point in time. And, life and death are different than, choices of whether to eat or not to eat or whatever. Her seizures, from my understanding, were getting worse and were uncontrollable at certain points and just continuing to go downhill. And, her whole quality of life was such that, yes, Compassion and Choices did help in some ways, but I think they were there in a very supportive sense. There was nothing, in my understanding, that would have pressured her to gone through with this if she didn't want to.
Okay, Evan.
I just wanted to point out, I guess, one thing about these conversations, and actually from a hospice and palliative care perspective from the board, are appreciative of the way the bill, getting back to the bill was changed, or it was added a requirement to have a consult with a hospice and palliative care professional, because I think this discussion we're having just points out how important that discussion is. Palliative care and hospice care are becoming more and more prevalent and available, and not just for the patient themselves if they're able to have that conversation, but as the doctor points out, for the family as well. So I think from our perspective, we were pleased to see that added to the bill.
Okay, and why don't you describe palliative care? Who can do that? Lizabeth?
So palliative care is a growing medical subspecialty where 80% of hospitals in our country, 50 beds or bigger now, have programs. And it's an interdisciplinary type of care that works with patients and their families who are living with chronic, serious illness, regardless of their age or prognosis. And the goal of palliation is to ensure that you are eliciting patients' goals and preferences and matching treatment choices to those goals and preferences in a very well-rounded, interdisciplinary way. So typically the team has physicians, nurses, social workers, spiritual support to meet the patient and the family where they're at. And again, palliative care is all hospice care is palliative care, but not all palliative care is limited to those patients that are living with a terminal illness. And as I said, most hospitals now are having palliative care programs because as our population ages and we are able to have patients that are living with more and more chronic illness, we aren't really doing a very good job of addressing the symptoms that come along with living with chronic illness. So palliative care is there to fill that niche and to ensure that patients are living well for as long as they can, and that things that are being done for them match what's important to them, which is very different from
And
person
how
to
would a
person.
person get into that? Would you go to your doctor and say, I'm chronically ill, I would like to have a conference with palliative care, or do I have to
Yes.
end up in the hospital?
So in our community, there are some outpatient palliative care options. There are more options in the hospital at this time. We've served over approximately 700 people in the last 2 years with our program, which is new as of 2 years ago. It is growing, and I think part of this discussion for me is what was seen in Oregon is a decrease in hospice and palliative care services. And that is my fear, that this is a very important subset of medicine that really works on those things that we can control. I may not be able to control the progression of somebody's Parkinson's, but I can help control how they feel about living with their disease and how their family is coping with their disease.
Okay. Yes, Joann?
I just wanted to clarify something. You had said that the enrollment in hospice in Oregon and Washington went down. The facts are here through actually some public policy prepared by Oregon, I think it's the Oregon Health Institute, or the hospital there, that actually in 2012, 97% of the people that went for these, the prescription for death with dignity, they were already enrolled in hospice or palliative care. So I see it only helping to bring more conversation into the issue of palliative care, which you and I were talking earlier. It's like not many people really understand palliative care versus hospice care, and I think that education is vitally important. But the fact that in both Washington State and Oregon, that 95+% of the people were already in hospice and decided to have this other choice. So it's helping palliative care and hospice.
Okay, David, did you have a comment? Or Alan?
No, regarding yes, 97% of the patients that did participate in the Death with Dignity Act were in hospice. But hospice agencies and utilization fall way behind the national average of growth in hospice care. So the mean length of stay nationally increased in 2000 to 2013 from 48 to 70 days. That's an increase of 22 days. In Oregon, it went from 43 to 58, 15 days. Both of them stayed about the same as far as their increase in hospice utilization. Nationally, across the nation, it increased 24.7%, and in Oregon, 25% as far as hospice utilization. So it was kind of on the same level. It wasn't increasing over and above because they had this law increase in hospices. And then the number of hospices that grew nationally went from 2,200 to 3,900, so a jump of 1,600. But in Oregon, it went from 43 to 48. So that's about a 70% increase nationally, about a 10% increase in Oregon. And when you look at Amsterdam, where assisted suicide and euthanasia now have been prevalent for quite a while, there's a paucity of hospice and palliative care agencies in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and now even in England. And there's been concern that they are losing that skill to take care of patients towards the end of their life when we can't cure them. But the most important thing we can do is intensively care for them. And so that's one of the things that we're concerned about with this type of law in Colorado, is that we will lose some of that emphasis on rallying people, health caregivers, family members and friends around a person in that human-to-human experience that we're all asked to do.
Okay. Yes, Joann?
Let me just, in regards to the hospice and palliative care in the state of Oregon, I've read several articles that they all cooperate together, so it doesn't surprise me that number hasn't gone up quite a bit, because they've been ahead of their time. And so I think that, it's risen. It may not have risen as much as it has nationally, but it has. And I think that's in part due to this ballot initiative that passed. The other thing I want to bring up is there are only 3 countries that have laws about euthanasia, and that's Belgium, Amsterdam, and I believe Switzerland. And these are not the government that we live in. This is a totally different issue, and this is something that has been brought up that I really think is trying to sideline what we're trying to do here. First of all, I'm not sure if you're aware, a lot of what happened in Belgium and in Amsterdam, those laws were set in place in the 1960s. No one's ever made a mention of them until now, until this started coming about. I guess I would never run a bill that would ever put anybody except people who are of sound mind and able to administer their own medication with a terminal illness defined as less than 6 months to live in a position where other people would be affected by it. This is not what this bill states. This is only for a specific type of person and that
Okay,
choice.
I think we have a couple of questions in the audience. Would you state your name and then ask your question?
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Dr. Chris Choi. I'm practicing in Fort Collins for the last 2 decades. My question is for Representative Ginal. This bill has been called Death with Dignity, Physician-Assisted Suicide, and various things in multiple states. If that's the case, why is it that on the death certificate, the cause of death is actually the suicide? You can't list that because they didn't actually die of their disease. They may have made their choice because of their disease, but they did not die of that disease. So without that legal record that then can be followed, how would you know what your numbers actually are? Why is it that not one of the things you put in your bill?
Thank you, Dr. Choi. And I believe that that was one of the issues that we have put in the bill, is that the bill says the cause of death is the terminal illness. Now, you know, we all have options. Robin Williams exercised his option without a doctor. That was suicide. There are a lot of things that, you know, will affect a religious person, their family. They don't want it to be mentioned as a suicide, and that's what this bill will do, is it will determine the cause of death reported to the CDPHE as whatever that terminal illness was.
I'm sorry, I think you may be missing my point. They may have chosen a physician-assisted suicide or death with dignity, but that is not actually the cause of their death. So if you believe this is death with dignity or physician-assisted suicide, then that should be represented on the death certificate, don't you think? The person chose suicide as their cause of death.
I thank you for that clarification, but it wasn't physician-assisted suicide because those patients had to open up those capsules, put them in whatever liquid or whatever form, and take them themselves without any assistance whatsoever.
I agree with your point mechanically, but as a practicing physician, I'd like to say that I don't think physicians should be therefore enabling, empowering, giving credibility to the fact that the patient committed suicide. If they committed suicide, then they did. That's the cause of death. But there's no reason to include physicians, myself included, as part of that enabling.
Okay.
Dr. Trey, you can opt out if you wish, and you don't have to see that patient.
Okay, is there another question in the audience?
Hi, I'm Teresa. And you mentioned Oregon, and I found out that Oregon, after their assisted suicide bill, has a 35 times higher suicide rate than the national average. And these are people who are not sick.
Okay,
And
do you have a
you're getting
question?
societal approval to suicide. But my question is, how are you going to stop the abuse and corruption that happens with this assisted suicide when there's financial interest in people dying, people feel pressure to die, and doctors, all they have to do is sign. You get 2 doctors to sign off. They don't see the patients. It's routine, and I see a lot of abuse happening.
Okay, is there any evidence, David?
I don't have evidence. I hear a couple things. One of them is a number of the statistics and the questions that are raised. I'm not sure the exact.
Speak a little louder.
I'm not sure of the exact correlation that can be drawn. Those are assumptions, but they're not necessarily adequately correlated.
I'm referring to, for instance, a patient in Oregon who the insurance company told them they'd pay for their suicide pills, but they wouldn't pay for the chemotherapy. That was too much money. They didn't want to pay for it. that kind of abuse, financial interests are involved in this, as well as just doctors. They know Dutch doctors will hurry along assisted suicide when they need an extra bed in the hospital. They don't see patients. They'll sign off on the suicide. We know that's being abused.
Okay, what kind of evidence do we have here?
I just want to say that if those patients weren't given chemotherapy, first of all, that's totally against the ACA Act right now. I have heard that some patients are refused palliative care and offered this drug, and to me, that's very wrong. I will make sure that something gets done about that, or at least I will attempt to try to make sure that that isn't an issue here. Now, how does this get reported is what you asked. I can't say everything's 100% with everything, but we have tried to put in a lot of protections for both the patient as well as for anyone else that's involved medically or any other way. And this is just the top page of all of the documents that the physician, the primary care physician, has to sign. There's like 10 top pages here, okay? And you're welcome to come up and take a look at these later. There's one or two for the physician, and it's not one page. It's like 30 pages. And there's also one for the second opinion from the physician. And then if there is a need to see a psychiatrist or seek psychiatric counseling to see if that person is mentally competent, there's a form for that. There's a form for the pharmacist. There's a form for the coroner. There's a form for CDPHE, which is the Colorado Department of Public Health, so that it gets to the Colorado Department of Public Health to get registered. So there are a lot of things that have to be, it's not just, here it is, sign this paper. There is a lot of work to get through, a lot of hurdles that you have to go through in order. You must really want to have this in order to get this prescription.
Okay, I think Evan had a comment.
Yes, thank you, Barbara. It was to build on something that Dr. Rastrelli was saying and maybe not lose that. You were talking about the proliferation of hospices around the country over the last 10 years. And a lot of that is due in part to there is a defined hospice benefit. Hospice has been a Medicare benefit since actually 1984. And it's been in the last 10 years that you've seen a lot of hospices around the country come up because there is that benefit that reimburses providers to pay for that. In palliative care, there's very little. There's not a defined benefit. There is some reimbursement that can be had. Physicians can bill for their consultative services, nurse practitioners, some social work. But I guess from the hospice perspective, if anything, hopefully what this conversation and the bill might spur is a conversation about the lack of or the gap that exists with caring for people who aren't terminal yet, because there's a way to care for them and a very good way to care for them that is paid for and is provided by professionals, where some effort or some time I think could be better spent, or along with this conversation, is how do we care for those people who are not yet terminal but chronically ill, and then you might see less of a need or less of a desire for this type of act or bill. So I think that was a very good point and wanted to
I think we
to
have a
that.
couple of other questions.
Thanks for taking my question. My name is Kevin Williams. I'm a concerned citizen, and I'd like to address my question to Alan if I could. I just barely found out about this. I haven't really had time to find this where I read this at, but I read that some of the doctors that were tried in the Nuremberg war trials, like 25 years previous, that were advocating for the same type of legislation. Is that true, Alan?
Well, when Joann had mentioned that the laws had been in effect in the Netherlands and those countries since the 60s, I mean, essentially, the euthanasia-assisted suicide movement, or euthanasia movement, has been present since the early 1900s. I mean, there's multiple societies around the world with all different names and nomenclature and everything else. But the actual laws that were passed, they were the first country to pass a euthanasia law, and that was in the 1990s, not 60s. At the time when Oregon was starting to become concerned about introducing that assisted suicide law, there was a National Institute of Health article and study done that reflected back on what was happening in the Netherlands back in 1992, I think, was this Journal of National Institute of Health. And it documented the abuses that were already happening. Now, I agree with you. We don't need to concentrate and distract ourselves to the euthanasia movement that's occurred, but they did start out with assisted suicide and euthanasia, and it is sweeping across. However, let's look at the United States and Oregon and where we are, and maybe it hasn't transitioned quite as quickly, but number one, what we need to do is concentrate on what Dr. Soy was kind of alluding to, and that is it ethical? Are we honoring choice by compromising the ethics of the healthcare community by saying, I want to affirm this action by making it legitimate, which is previously not legitimate and it's against the law, to say that a physician can prescribe an overdose of medications that are normally used for good purpose and then allow that patient to take that. So if you really look at the issue, does a patient have a choice at any time in their life, at any time in their illness, and a terminal illness prognosticating is very difficult, but do they have that choice to go ahead and have their death at this time? Yes, they do. Do they have a right to die? I think that's a non sequitur. A right to die, I don't know of anyone that in the past or present or in the future that is ever going to be denied the right to die. And so I don't know why we need to legislate the right to die. Dignity, dignity and respect all come along with that, and relief of suffering. But you don't get rid of the person that's suffering, the sufferer. You don't relieve suffering by ending the life of the sufferer. You bring true compassion in and pay attention to the real semantics of very purposeful intention of removing suicide from any bill, and in Oregon too, because by definition, suicide means the intentional taking of one's life. That's the Webster Dictionary definition. So you cannot deny that the person that is dying from cancer but takes this dose of medicine prescribed by a doctor or not is committing suicide because they're intentionally ending their life at that time. And one of the people that did testify at the committee hearing was a gentleman, very sad, stage 4 renal cell cancer, and he said, I died from my cancer when I take those pills. It's not suicide. That includes depression and bipolar diseases and other things, dementia. But no, it really truly is that. So we have to call it what it is, even though we want to approve it and legalize it. That's the thing we have to truly look at. And unfortunately, we already deal with a lot of suicides that we wish we could prevent, especially in the teenagers and everything else in the young. But that's where physician aid in dying is actually a good term, because that's what hospice and palliative care physicians and nurses do. We aid the patient and their families through that whole dying process, all the way through. And we use whatever medication we need in order to relieve their suffering as much as possible and allow them to experience the most important part of their lives next to their birth. And that is, this is a very sacred space. Not religion or anything else. Just sacred in the definition of this is very special and privileged to be there. And the reason I went into hospice and palliative medicine from anesthesia was for the very reason that we weren't adequately taking care of people's symptoms. And that's why I became a hospice and palliative care physician, so that I could do that.
Now, isn't there a point somewhere where people are really suffering and nothing helps? David, would you like to address that?
Well, I'm going to digress a moment, and that is that obviously this kind of quite healthy conversation hasn't happened near enough. And that the risk that we run is the dichotomies of worst fears and parsing out things such as how do we label a a death certificate, and I recognize that ethical bind that it puts the physician in. And I don't know my answer to that one. I'd have to think about that a long time. The question, I think, boils down to is, for me, when there is that point reached, when the best, because I believe palliative care and hospice are great gifts to society more recently, and I would hope I could take advantage of those without taking my own life, but I would like to have that choice if I reach that point. Mm-hmm. And I have had this conversation with 2 physicians, and they had to stop the conversation, not because they did not ethically believe that they would like to participate in that, but they did not want to be on the record, and they knew the legalities. They knew what their organization expected of them, and they lived within those boundaries. But so back to I think we have to do all we can to integrate in a holistic way, which I believe you all are attempting to do. There is a point, I guess, beyond that there are choices to be made by individuals with the best safeguards that can be put in. I wouldn't call them hurdles. I'd call them the best safeguards as possible. And they won't work 100% of the time. And abuses are a risk. I really believe that. And they're a risk now. They're a risk at this point in time. We've watched our neighbor put a gun in his mouth and shoot himself across the street because he had so much pain. And that's the only choice he felt he had. Now, he didn't realize there may be better choices, but it happened that fast. If there are systems put in place that allow and support, in fact, perhaps even mandate that people engage in the deeper conversation about the sacredness of death as much as the sacredness of life, and where does choice fit into that? And I wouldn't impose on people, but I what we already have done is impose on people the lack of ability to make that choice with at least humanely as possible. And that's my concern.
Okay, I think, is there one more question? Oh, 2 more.
Thank you. I'm Mary Dietrich. I support this bill, Joann. In fact, in my mind, and I taught semantics and language for 20 years, if I make that choice someday, I really don't care whether you call it cancer or suicide or whatever. I think that issue is really minor. As far as the abuses go.
What about a question?
Yes, sorry. Have you thought about if I were to go through this directive and fill out all the paperwork and have everything approved, and then something happened where I was unable to administer that medication, of giving someone else permission to administer that medication if I went through all those processes? That is one of my concerns, is that if I got to the point where I could not actually administer that medication to myself.
Thank you for the question, but the bill is specifically written so that you take that medication yourself. No one else can help you. And that prevents a lot of possibilities of coercion or forcing someone to take their life when they don't really want to. It's you and you alone that can do this. And that's why this bill is set up this way. It's to put in those barriers and those protections for you. And you can change your mind. And if you do, that medication will be properly brought back to the pharmacy or the hospital to get disposed of.
Okay, one more question.
Hello, I'm Barb Monarch, and I would like you to tell us what the dosage is, and is the drug the same drug they use for capital punishment?
Thank you for that question. The medication is Seconal or phenobarbital, but mainly it's Seconal. I don't know if you recall, Marilyn Monroe it was talked that she committed suicide by what was called REDS, and that was Seconal. Seconal's been out for a long, long time. The dosage is 9 milligrams, which is 9 grams, which is, they come in 100 milligram capsules. And so you have to get 90 capsules, open them up, put them in whatever you choose of liquid to take them with. And I heard that it isn't very tasty, so you probably want to put them with minimal liquid. And so you have to be able to do all of that. No one can help you. Open those capsules, put it in a container, and take that medication. So right there, I hope that answers your question in regards to what type of medication it is. It usually, on the average, takes effect where you get into a sleep state within about 5 minutes. The median time for death, according to the Oregon and Washington data that I have, is about 25 minutes. There have been 2 or 3 people that have come out of it without dying, and one came out of a deep sleep 3 days later and was madder than a hornet because they woke up. But there's a very peaceful death, and it happens quite quickly in most cases.
Okay, one more question.
Thank you. My name is Colin Fisher. I'm, this gentleman, a concerned citizen. My question relates to what recourse, or that you said that the medical professionals and institutions would be immune from any response from me. But if a doctor or institution does falsely make a bad diagnosis of this person, and you go to administer this, what recourse do I as family have to go back and say, this was blatantly, not just a hard judgment, blatantly wrong judgment?
Thank you for that question. That's why you have 2 professional opinions about terminal, and if that patient is terminal, they spend time with that patient, they fill out the documents, and if one doesn't agree with the other, then it doesn't fly. That doesn't mean that the patient can't pick another doctor for a second opinion and try to get the medication. But the doctors are not held liable because they're not God, but they've got enough education, more than you and I and many others, about terminal illness and how to diagnose it. And so if they are making the wrong opinion, or maybe that person pulls out of something, they should not be held liable for that. But I put a lot of faith in the physicians and nurse practitioners and our palliative care and our hospice, that they make those decisions, and they're educated decisions about what's going to happen to that patient.
Okay, we're coming to the end of our program. And so for your last comment, and it has to be short, tell us why you think this bill would be good or bad for Colorado. And we'll start with Alan here.
Well, I'll go ahead and finish up then with some of the statistics of why I'm worried about where this will go from Oregon. We talk about a referral to psychiatry, and in Oregon in 1999, 43% of the patients were referred to a psychiatrist. In recent years, it's been under 3%. So that access is not being offered too much. And the physician-patient relationship is not designated, about they'd only have to meet them once if they go shopping for someone that will honor their assisted suicide wish. Then they can go shopping and find one that's on the list. Then the other thing is that when we talk about them breaking open those capsules and doing this and having this peaceful death over 25 minutes or whatever, there's no one there. There's no necessity to have someone there. They did start to ask to have recorded, if the physician was there, what the time from ingestion to death was, or a healthcare professional. So we really don't know what the quality of the passing of this person is in the vast majority of the cases. In 2014...
Okay. I'm going to have to stop you.
Just one statistic, please.
Okay.
Out of the number of patients with information available about the time from ingestion to death, only 20 out of 105. 85, we don't have any information.
Okay.
So this is all going on behind the scenes that we really don't know how well it's working.
David.
Very quickly, there's apparently a lot of unanswered questions about the process and procedures and legalities. I think it boils down to, if we perhaps take a more visionary look at this and try to integrate the best services available for all patients, it gives one more choice for those who make the choice on their own.
Okay. Lizabeth?
I think palliative care is the viable alternative to physician-assisted suicide, and it enables patients and families to engage in really important end-of-life tasks that I have witnessed over and over again, and it robs people of the opportunity to do that. I think that we need more momentum around legislation for good symptom management as people live longer with chronic illness.
Okay. Joann?
I want to thank you because this has brought out a discussion that probably wouldn't have happened had this bill not come about in February. And we saw pros and cons on both sides. And I just say that whether we call it Death with Dignity bill, California's calling it the End of Life Option Act, it's a compassionate response to unremitting suffering. And it's a personal freedom. It's a personal and it's a difficult choice to make. And so I and my co-sponsor, Lois Court, are going to start in working on this bill with various folks from hospice, palliative care, the disabled community, to get this bill to a point that it is an excellent bill to bring forth next session. So I really thank you all for having this discussion this evening.
Okay. Evan?
Thank you very much. Commenting on the bill, I think from a hospice perspective, the act, it goes against many of the underlying tenets of hospice care. So it's a struggle. It's a challenge for most people in hospice to think of this being an option for folks. I think we very much understand the value of choice. And so I think we appreciate the conversation and appreciate the changes that have been made in the bill, but as a hospice professional and seeing that go on every day, I think really the answer is in what Lizabeth was talking about, and maybe Colorado can become a leader. There's not enough emphasis put on, as we were talking about, palliative care, the funding for that, the amount of professionals that are available. Hospice, of course, and again, it's a benefit, and it can be provided just about everywhere in the state in a very good way. Maybe in this conversation that has started, let's take a look at what's not there and what can be added.
Okay. Thank you very much for a most interesting discussion, and thank you in the audience for your questions. It was really very good. This CrossCurrents program will be rebroadcast at various times during the month. Please check your local listings for the exact dates and times. Copies of recent CrossCurrents programs are available for checkout at all 3 branches of the Poudre River Library District, as well as the Loveland Public Library. The video is available at the League of Women Voters website, which is www.lwv-larimercounty.org. Thanks again for tuning in.